Hey guys, welcome to Think Duality. Today we're going to talk about Airbnb. And we're going to talk about the impact that Airbnb has had on the economy and some of the surprise news surrounding Airbnb. A lot of which I was quite shocked by. But perhaps maybe if you're an investor or somebody who's a host or has a property or looking at possibly getting involved in the Airbnb sector, then this video is definitely for you. So currently, as it stands, we are currently in a property supply crisis, right? And with rising interest rates, with the way the inflation is, increasing population and immigration, geopolitical tensions, and everything and all and above is obviously contributing to this property supply crisis. Now, it obviously has created a perfect storm. Especially housing and proper housing is harder to come by. Now it's getting more expensive than ever before, and you guys obviously feel it because if you've recently talked to a mortgage broker or your bank about the possibility of getting into another property, then clearly you understand where I'm coming from. It is getting quite difficult to purchase another property. Anyhow, or purchase a property in general. So we're talking about the risk the short-term rental industry poses to the property markets globally, and of course the money supply trends and what they mean or what they could mean for inflation. So is Airbnb a bust? Is this bubble about to burst, or is Airbnb for real? Now there's been a lot of concerns and a lot of ambiguity when it surrounds Airbnb. In fact, for years, I've kind of been on the sidelines when it comes to Airbnb. I like the concept. I don't mind it at all, actually, and I think it's rather intriguing, quite interesting. And as an investor, it's something that I've been kind of looking at wanting to get into. However, I had some difficulties when it came to trying to find the right kind of property. Now, especially in the location where I'm in, there are a lot of factors that kind of make things a little bit harder for somebody wanting to get into the Airbnb sector. There's a lot of concerns, and I'll kind of get into that in a little bit here. But depending on where you live, Airbnb could be quite lucrative, and it could be a great opportunity for you to get in. And from some of the people that I know who actually are hosting and have an Airbnb property, some of them are making like almost 2 to 3 times more than what they would normally make if they were renting the property to just, as is. So there's definitely some opportunities for growth, but obviously with anything, and we always mention this, you have to do your due diligence. So let's talk about their recent, let's talk about Airbnb's report card as of late. So Airbnb has recently recorded record profits. Now, this is interesting, right? So there were some concerns that people had voiced and opinionated about the short-term rental market, and ideas about where it's potentially going, and how there could be a lot of concerns when it comes to the short-term rental market. But after I share this information with you, I'll let you kind of be the judge on that. I'd love to hear from you guys as well in the comments section, if you guys agree with these statements or what your guys' thoughts are overall when it comes to the Airbnb market or the short-term rental market. Having said that, Airbnb has recently indicated it's probably its most profitable ever time. And in terms of revenue, and according to a shareholder letter that the company penned, recently, Airbnb reported a net income of $1.6 billion. Now, that's including a one-time tax benefit and revenue growth of about 18%, which equates to about $3.4 billion. But Airbnb expects to generate about $2.3 to $2.17 billion in Q4. That'd be an increase of about 12 to 14% if you were doing the math. That's incredible. That's an amazing growth. So if you're an investor, if you're part of the Airbnb sector, then that's news that you definitely want to hear. The chief financial officer of Airbnb, David Stevenson, penned a letter to shareholders last week and indicated that although there's some record profits and some fantastic news coming out of the sector, he did express that there is some volatility that they'd be noticing. And with the current macroeconomic trends and geopolitical tensions around the world, those factors could potentially spill into the market and cause and lead to some negative results. Now, in Q1, Airbnb had record bookings. Okay, talking about Q1 of this year. Um, so apparently they had an increase of about 14% in Q1 from the previous year. Again, a significant increase, and that growth that I'm talking about has been quite evident in the Asia Pacific region. Now, this is interesting because uh, for the longest time when I'm thinking about Airbnb, and I understand Airbnb is global, right? But a majority of, like, for me, if I'm traveling, I'm looking at Airbnb properties in North America. There's a lot of amazing destinations here in the U.S. and Canada, and a lot of fantastic Airbnb opportunities um, that are quite competitive when it comes to hotels and resorts. But having said that, there's a lot of people that we know who have stayed at Airbnb properties globally as well around the world. But surprisingly enough, the Asia Pacific region has been growing at an exponential rate. So this is quite interesting. And apparently, according to Airbnb, that part of the region has not only grown exponentially, but it's kind of come back to pre-pandemic levels. So it's fully recovered from pre-pandemic levels, with gross bookings of about 23% increase from last quarter compared to the same period back in 2019. So again, from an investor's perspective, and from that's a positive sign. It definitely is assuring to know that companies are starting to kind of rebound and get back to those pre-pandemic levels and some kind of normalcy as well too. Now, understand that China outbound travel has also increased about 100% year over year. Now, Airbnb also went on to say that they are investing. They are putting a lot of effort into the international markets. Obviously, following an increased activity, as I mentioned, in the in the Asia Pacific region, but areas like Germany and Brazil are also growing as well, and so they want to focus a lot of their efforts there. Apparently, the company reported, and this is earlier this year, that Korea has also now officially become the fastest growing country in the Airbnb sector, with gross nights booked at about 54% higher than what they were back in 2019. Now, it's looking at growing in other areas such as Japan, India. They want to continue investing and exploring out further opportunities in areas like China. I mentioned Germany and Brazil as well too. So not only the Asia Pacific region, but we're also talking about the Southeast Asian market as well, and of course South America. So Mexico is now also starting to become one of those list of countries that Airbnb wants to continue to explore and potentially grow in, and of course certain areas within Europe as well. Now, with the Euro 2024 coming up next year in June, July, this is going to be a hotbed for investors. So I'm not saying if you're an investor to go out there and purchase a property in Germany, but definitely if you have property in Germany, and if you're looking at the possibility of getting into the Airbnb sector, or if you have a property that's already in operation under the Airbnb umbrella, then I think you're going to do quite well. Having said that, all of these markets have something in common. They're all large tourism markets. And, so these are the markets that obviously Airbnb wants to continue to grow in. Now, Airbnb also added nearly 1 million active listings in the year. So that's grown about 19% since last quarter. And of course, the biggest areas, as I mentioned, was the Asia Pacific region as well as Latin America. Now, the CEO of Airbnb, Brian Chesky, indicated that they've been focusing on making hosting as popular as traveling. And that effort obviously has proved itself in its recent Q3 earnings. And they ended the quarter with the highest number of active listings and saw a high active number of listings growth all across all regions and markets. The company last quarter said that it surpassed 7 million active listings in the third quarter alone, which made more than about $19 billion. So again, if you're an investor or wanting to get into wanting to invest into Airbnb, those are definitely things you want to hear. So apparently there's some new features that are going to be coming soon to Airbnb users, and it plans to release some more features in the coming month. Now the company previewed a couple of them in their letter to shareholders, and so one of them is like a toggle that users can turn on to search for listings that are pet friendly. So a lot of people out there with their pets, and we know people are pet owners, and one of the biggest challenges they have, especially when they look at Airbnb listings, is that they're noticing there's a lot of listings that are not pet friendly. And so a lot of them opt out and wanting to get an Airbnb, and they kind of look for the latter, which is obviously like a hotel or something along those lines. But now there's a lot more Airbnb listings that are pet friendly, and now with this new feature, you'd be able to filter those listings out to make it easier for your search. And there's also an amenities filters as well for people who want larger size beds, like king size beds, right? So that's kind of cool. Now the upgrade also includes listings available on dates slightly outside of a user's search. Especially if there's not enough listings or active listings, especially during that preferred time. So now the release of these new features obviously is to improve overall reliability. And this is one of the areas that I think Airbnb has kind of been struggling, right? Because they're competing against hotels, they're competing against resorts. And usually if you're comparing apples to apples, most people tend to go with hotels just because they're from a reliability aspect, right? So Airbnb, one of the good things about Airbnb as a company is they ask a lot of questions. They're constantly serving their customers and active members and hosts, and they're trying to get an idea. They're trying to collect as much feedback as possible so that the data that they collect can ultimately help them to being able to identify trends and to be able to kind of help mitigate from prior mistakes and give them the tools and the knowledge to help them grow in these markets. So it's released based on the feedback that they were able to collect from their hosts and users. They've been able to release more than 350 new features and upgrades over the last 2 years on that feedback. And one of the other features, and I didn't even mention this, but is the reduced cleaning fees from hosts. That's another biggie, because a lot of people find these rooms that are ideal, that are within their price range, but then when they see the cleaning fees, they're like, whoa, that's a little bit out of my price range, and they end up opting for like a hotel instead, because a lot of that stuff is already included in the price and what have you, right? These cleaning fees obviously are like in addition to your accommodation and stay, but now with reduced cleaning fees, that's going to make it more marketable and give that potential customer the opportunity to really think twice about wanting to go with the hotel, and because of those reasons, they may actually want to stay in an Airbnb property. Now, talking about some of those fears, right, from the perspective of an Airbnb operator, the fear is that owners of short-term rentals accommodations may force sellers due to some of the restrictions in their area, forcing them out of the short-term rental market, or simply for financial reasons given the rising interest rates. And I talked about this, especially in my area. There's a lot of restrictions. There's a lot of restrictions on people wanting to get into the Airbnb market, especially if you're in a downtown or if you're in a particular location where there's like a lot of hotels. There are some Airbnb friendly locations that you can stay in, but they're starting to get few and far in between. It's starting to get hard to find out those locations, and frankly put, some of those locations are not the most ideal places. And when you compare them with an actual hotel, sometimes the hotel rates are a lot less, and you get a lot more from staying at a hotel as opposed to staying in an Airbnb property. So Airbnb acknowledges this, and they're doing their best to try to find ways and creative ways to be able to work around this, and just to kind of make yeah, with all the features and all the things that they're trying to do to improve on the experience, the overall experience. Now, in some cases, they may not be able to help out, right? There's going to be times and there's going to be locations. Unfortunately, there's just going to be too many restrictions or things to prevent you from being an Airbnb host. And that's just unfortunately the way it is. Having said that, there's still a lot of great markets to jump in to the short-term rental market. Now, while a lot of these things won't be an issue, especially in the kind of market that we're in, current prices and mortgage rates are obviously beyond the reach of most would-be buyers. It's really interesting. There was I was reading an article about this family in Ontario that that had purchased a property a while back, and I think yeah, based on they may have been on like an open variable interest rate, which was like ridiculously low, and all of a sudden with the new interest rates, their new mortgage payment would actually go up, or their payments would be, I think, work out to be about close to $5,000 more a month, and to the point where it's only husband and wife working, and they have a family, where they were very stressed. There was problems also, like they were experiencing marital problems, and they weren't able to sleep at night. The stress was taking a toll on them, both physically and mentally. And a lot of the developers, they're like the builders, they're like, there's nothing they can really do, right? And they obviously they sympathize and they're empathetic towards what's going on with a lot of these folks, but at the end of the day, they're a business as well, and they have to build, they have to collect these funds in order for them to be able to stay alive and sustain their operations as well. So they're trying to work with a lot of these people. They're trying to find ways to kind of like prolong the the purchase, like maybe extend their purchase agreement so that it gives the owner a little bit more time and flexibility in terms of being able to qualify for that mortgage, but and even give them some discounts as well that could potentially help bring some of those prices down. And all that is quite generous because there's a lot of builders and developers that frankly don't need to do that. In one of my videos, I also talked about how in the next few years, RBC, a major bank, predicts there's going to be about close to $400 billion of mortgages coming up for renewal, and the average payment increase that people are going to be experiencing are anywhere between 30 to 48% more than what they're currently paying. And with the way the economy is, and with the struggles that people are going through financially, it's really hard for a lot of these people to even just go and buy groceries, just to even go get milk. I mean, the cost of milk and eggs and bread and a lot of the staples that we're accustomed to, it's getting quite challenging. And when you think about it, all that is adding up. And then you got restaurants who have to add a premium to their services because the cost of food is going up, and then the cost of labor is going up. There's a lot of restaurants that are operating in the red, and they're losing money. But at the end of the day, what do you do, right? So it's a whole chain effect. There's a lot of issues and problems going on in the market. We talk about this all the time, but these are just some of the things that are also being experienced by landlords and by investors in the real estate market. Now, on the flip side, the increase in people becoming Airbnb operators for profit has seen the supply of long-term rentals dry up, right? So as people opt out for more lucrative short-term options, that could be a plus point, right? So there's a lot of people who are like, you know what, I don't know if I really want to stay in this property for long term, and they're starting to look at short-term rental markets a little bit more positively. So that's kind of an upswing to some of the challenges that I was talking about. Now, the other issues with short-term rentals is obviously the growth of short-term rentals has had numerous consequences, right? And we just kind of touched on some of those things. One of the biggest was the shortage of the supply of supply of long-term rental accommodations in many of the cities that we live in. This has obviously caused the rents to go up substantially. And this is a problem because in some cities, some locations, and depending on where you live, there's probably no rental caps. This is something that as people, we need to lobby our council, our city council, and members of the government, your mayor, and the people that represent you, and you need to really fight for this. And I think they need to start imposing rental caps and start to make it a little bit more lucrative and affordable. Otherwise, what's going to happen is rents are just going to go through the roof. And right now, in some cities, I'm even noticing that some rents are almost the equivalent of like a mortgage, right? And uh, what's interesting is, I mean, even if you're not an owner, if you're a renter, and your rent is almost the same as what somebody's paying for their mortgage. Well, the disadvantage of being a renter, just a renter as itself, is that you don't actually own that property, so there's no equity going in. And at any time, even after your lease expires, you run the risk of your landlord starting to increase those rates on you. Whereas if you own your own home, then obviously whatever money you're putting into your property, that's your asset, right? But again, not everybody's in a position where they can become an owner, and that's obviously one of the things, and one of the big things that the government needs to work on, right? So homeowner associations like HOA, and a lot of these bodies, governing bodies, they've had a lot of noisy guests, and because of which they've banned a lot of short-term rentals when they can. A lot of hotels and a lot of the bigger chain hotels and other operators, depending on where you live, have complained to city council and the government. They're like, hey, this building that has a lot of these short-term rentals, they're really affecting the market. There's noisy guests, they're loud, and they complain to the point where the cities usually opts in favor of the bigger taxpayer, a lot of these bigger companies, and they kind of rule in their favor sometimes. And maybe sometimes that can give a bad, or that could negatively impact the Airbnb market. Other problems have stemmed from the fact that being an Airbnb operator has definitely more from renting out a spare bedroom into a full-time business in many cases. And some operators of short-term rentals have tried to cut costs and add extra fees for cleaning. Now, we addressed some of the new features are reduced cleaning fees, so that's a positive. What was once a cheap alternative to a hotel stay has now become just as expensive without the services that make hotel stays more comfortable. So that's important to understand. So city authorities have started to crack down on many Airbnb operators, because they are competing with hotels, and the hotels are noticing that their profit levels are starting to dwindle, right? And that's because a lot of people are actually opting for more short-term rentals in the Airbnb market. So as these big hotel companies are starting to feel the pinch, they're starting to become more loud and becoming complaining to the point where they're lobbying their government officials that, hey, something needs to be done. And obviously, as city authorities tend to crack down on these operators, they're trying to force these individuals, because I mean, you have to understand, these hotels, they pay their taxes. They're registered businesses, and in their opinion, they're like, hey, we do all these things, but then these Airbnb operators, they're taking away our business, right? They're taking away from our profit levels, and they don't have to pay the taxes we do. They don't have to register a business. They don't have to do all these things. But even in the Airbnb industry and market, there are obviously regulations that you have to comply to. You can't just go, become an Airbnb operator and think you don't have to do anything over and above to be able to maintain. It is a business, and there's rules, there's things that you have to follow, protocols, things in place that you need to adhere to. But again, at the same time, there's arguments on both sides, right? So all of this obviously has caused a massive crackdown around the world. But it hasn't really hurt the Airbnb market, as I mentioned earlier. It's growing exponentially. So again, Airbnb. If you go on Airbnb, or if you even Google it, there's a number of different cities that around the world that are obviously having a lot of different issues with, like, facing like zoning restrictions and things to prevent Airbnb operators to operate within a certain area or vicinity, within a certain hotel, etc. And then there's the licensing, the paying the taxes portion. There's a lot of different things that can go against them. Apparently New York, places like Seattle. I think Seattle. I heard they've got ban. They got a ban on short-term rentals within certain regions. So all these things have definitely put a lot of pressure on the short-term rental market. Now, with the current crisis, obviously, some people would think that Airbnb is a bubble, right? And perhaps maybe this is why in the Southeast Asia and Asia Pan Pacific region, Latin America, Europe, maybe the laws are a little bit different there, right? So they're a little bit more favorable to people wanting to get into that industry there because maybe it's not as difficult to wanting to get into business as an Airbnb operator there as opposed to here in the United States. So let's see here. Well, while things are going well, many operators obviously have built up quite a portfolio of their rental properties. But again, when you have to finance and when you have to get a mortgage, and you got to do your P&L, your profit and losses, and you got to really be able to ascertain whether or not that's a viable. If it's a viable business opportunity for you, right? The last thing you want to do is to run into a deficit, and there is that risk and reality that you could end up with a property that may not do so well. Now, there are a lot of companies out there that you can reach out to, property management companies that can help you along your journey as being an Airbnb operator. They even have reduced ways to get reduced cleaning fees through in-house people that they have that would come out and clean your properties at a discount. They would coach you and help you in terms of getting the right kind of furniture, the right kind of supplies to be able to maintain your business. And a lot of those things can definitely differentiate you between the average person who tries to do it themselves. And there's nothing wrong with doing it yourself, but obviously if you go through a professional entity in a corporation, somebody that specializes in this area, you might have a lot more success. And sure, on the interim, you might have to pay for that for those services, but you're going to learn a lot, and you're going to be able to get a You're going to be able to get into a position where it becomes a turnkey service, and to the point where you start to become profitable. So yeah, that's the opportunity cost you have to be faced with. You might have to cough up about 10, 15, maybe 20% back to these kind of companies, but it might be worth it long term. And again, that could be the reason why you're successful, as opposed to say somebody who's just starting off new trying to do it themselves. I remember people in the past who were working 9 to 5 jobs, and or even some people who weren't even living in the city, they were living in another city, and they were book solid. I mean, they were doing amazing, with booking their properties. The biggest problem they had was as soon as a guest would leave, then they have to find somebody to clean that property. And a lot of these people weren't in a position to clean it themselves because they either have full-time jobs, they've got lives outside of work that would prevent them from being able to take a few hours out of their time to go and clean their properties. They would try to enlist the services of like a company or a cleaning company, or find somebody in their community who can go out and clean these properties. And then sometimes those people didn't even clean them. They were sick, or they would do a very lackluster job. And that would obviously hurt their business, because then you have to understand, then the next group of people are coming into your property, and then if they see that the toilet hasn't even been flushed, the bed sheets haven't been there's no turn down service, or the towels look dirty, or they got stains on them, well, obviously that leads that's going to leave a negative impact on your business, and the reviews are going to indicate so. And people can be harsh, right? So you got to be careful with that, but it's good to know that overall there is some positivity going on in the world of Airbnb, and I think it's exciting. So I'm definitely going to follow this story, and I'd love to keep you guys up to date with it. And so until we talk about it, I look forward to the next one. Thanks again, guys, for joining us. We look forward to seeing you soon.